Hello again. Tonight's story is about Hattie Brannigan, a 24-year-old bicycle mechanic who joined a rowing club for the free coffee and left it 11 days later in complete disgrace, and Solveig Brandt, the silver medalist everyone in Ashfield watched and nobody ever spoke to, who started standing in the boathouse doorway before sunrise with 2 cups in her hands, waiting. What begins as the most humiliating accident of one woman's life slowly becomes a story about repair, about the difference between something that is broken and something that was simply never used. The crack was not a loud sound. I want that on the record, because for the rest of my life, people in this town have described it as a bang, a crash, a noise like a shot going off inside a church. It wasn't. It was small and dry and almost polite. It was the sound a wooden ruler makes when you bend it just past its opinion. It happened at 12 minutes past 6 on a Tuesday morning in October, in a boathouse that smelled of varnish and cold river, in front of roughly 40 people who had all, until that exact second, been thinking about their own hands. I was 24. I had been a member of the Cleve Rowing Club for 11 days. I was holding one end of a blade I had no business holding. My left foot was on a patch of ramp that had been wet since 1974, and when I went down, I did the thing every mechanic does on instinct, which is a reach for the nearest solid object and hold on. The nearest solid object was the rack. On the top shelf of that rack, up in the dark where the roof beams meet, there was a wooden double skull with a hand-painted number 9 on the bow. It had been up there for 9 years. It had never been in the water. Not once, not even for 5 minutes, not even to check the trim. Everybody at that club knew it the way you know the year your grandmother was born, as a fact that lives in the walls. It came down about 18 inches, caught the corner of the beam, and made that small dry sound. And 40 people turned around. I have thought about the next 4 seconds more than I have thought about almost anything in my life. Somebody's mug hit the concrete. Somebody said a word I'm not going to repeat. Tally, who was 19 and my only friend in that building, made a noise like a kettle being taken off the heat too fast. And at the far end of the boathouse, in the doorway where the light comes in flat and gray off the water at that hour, a tall woman with short silver hair put down the toolbox she was carrying, very carefully, as if the floor might also break. Her name was Solveig Brandt. She was 37 years old. She had won a silver medal for this country before I could ride a bicycle without stabilizers, and she had built the boat I had just dropped with her own hands. She walked the length of that boathouse. Nobody spoke. She crouched by the bow and put 2 fingers on the crack the way a doctor puts 2 fingers on a wrist, and she looked at it for a long, long time. Then she stood up and looked at me. And I want you to understand that I was already composing the letter I would write from whatever country I fled to. And she said, in a voice as flat and unhurried as somebody reading out a measurement, "Same time tomorrow." Quick note before we begin. If you want the hotter, uncensored version of stories like this, I share them on my Patreon, GL After Hours. The link's in the description, for whenever you want to stay a little longer inside the story. Let me back up. Ashfield is the kind of river town that has exactly one of everything. One bridge, one chip shop that closes when the owner feels like it, one bank that became a wine bar, one bakery, one rowing club, with a green corrugated roof that has been the same color of green since before anyone alive can remember, and one bicycle shop, which is mine, or my uncle's, technically, in the way that things are technically your uncle's when he has been in Portugal for 3 years and sends you a postcard every Christmas that just says, "Keep it going." Brannigan cycles on the towpath, between the club and the bridge, 2 rooms, one of them full of wheels. I have worked there since I was 17, and I can true a wheel with my eyes shut, which is a useless skill to mention at parties. And I mention it constantly. I am not, and I want to be extremely clear about this, an athlete. I am 5'4". I have the lung capacity of a woman who considers the towpath a form of transport rather than a lifestyle. When I run, my own dog looks embarrassed for me, and I don't even have a dog. I borrow one from the woman 2 doors down, and it still manages to be embarrassed. So the obvious question is what I was doing in a boathouse at 5:30 in the morning in October, holding equipment worth more than my van. The answer is coffee and Tally, and a lie. Tally O.C. was 19, in her first year at the technical college, and she came into my shop in September with a back wheel so buckled it looked like modern art. While I was fixing it, she talked without stopping for 11 minutes about the novice squad at the club. They took anyone. They were desperate. They'd lost 4 people to actual adult responsibilities over the summer. And the coffee in the clubhouse was free and endless and, quote, genuinely quite good. I said, because I am a person who says things. If it's free, I'll come once. She said, great, Tuesday, 5:30. I said, in the morning? She said, obviously in the morning. And that is how I ended up standing on a wet ramp at dawn with a life jacket on backwards and my uncle's brass bicycle bell hanging off my keys, ringing softly every time I shivered. That bell matters later. Everything on a key ring matters later. That's just how key rings work. Here's what I want you to know about the Cleve Rowing Club, because it explains everything that comes after. It is not a glamorous place. The changing rooms have a heater that makes a noise like a distant argument. There is a whiteboard by the door with the cruise chalked on it, and a photograph from 1987 of 8 men who all appear to be the same man. Dot Feeney, who is 71 and has run the tea urn since roughly the invention of tea, will hand you a mug and tell you the water temperature whether or not you asked. And it has a legend, the way small clubs do. The legend was that Solveig Brandt was born in this town, that she left it at 18 for a training center up north, that she came back from a world championship with a silver medal around her neck and half the county waiting at the station. Then, 3 months before the year that would have mattered most, something happened to her left wrist. Everyone told the story differently. A fall on ice, a fault in the equipment, something torn that doesn't tear back. Whatever it was, she never raced again. She could have gone anywhere. Coaching posts, television, the whole comfortable afterlife they hand to people who nearly win. Instead, she came home to Ashfield, bought the crumbling repair shed behind the boathouse, and started building boats. Now, 9 years on, she was the most watched woman in that town, and possibly the least spoken to. She rowed alone every single morning in a single scull, out before the novices, back before the light was properly up. She fixed things for the club and refused to be thanked. She wore the same charcoal wool coat. I would later learn it was missing its second button, and I would later learn exactly when that stopped being true. And she said perhaps 40 words a week, all of them necessary. Tally, on my first morning, delivered the entire biography in a whisper while we carried a boat, and finished with, "Don't talk to her, though." "Why not?" "Nobody talks to her," she said, as if I'd asked why nobody licked the ceiling. For 11 days, I did not talk to her. And it was easy, because for 11 days, I was mostly concentrating on not dying. Rowing, it turns out, is not a sport. It is a punishment invented by people who wanted to make sitting down difficult. Everything I thought I knew about my own body turned out to be a rumor. The first morning I caught what they call a crab, which is when your blade goes into the water and refuses to come out, and the handle then attempts to remove you from the boat. And I made a sound in front of 8 strangers that I have never made before or since. But here's the embarrassing part. I loved it, not the pain. The other thing, the bit at 6:10 when the mist sits on the cleave like something breathing, and 8 people who have nothing in common get 1 stroke right. 1. And the boat goes quiet under you and just runs. And for about 4 seconds, you are not a woman with a leaking roof and an uncle in Portugal. You're just weight and water and a small brass bell ringing on your keys in the bottom of the boat. 4 seconds. It's a very expensive hobby for 4 seconds. I understood immediately why the whole town was mad. And every one of those mornings, out in the middle of the river where the current is honest, there was a single scull going the other way with a woman in it, whose silver hair caught the light before anything else did. She never looked over. I checked a lot. The 11th morning was a Tuesday, and Tuesday was blades. I had been given a job which felt like a promotion. Carry the spare blade from the rack at the back to the ramp. That was it. That was the entire job. A blade is nearly 4 meters long and weighs about as much as a large cat. And the trick is to keep the flat part turned the right way so the wind doesn't take it. And I had done it 4 times without incident. And I was, God help me, feeling capable. I want to be fair to myself here. The ramp was wet. It's always wet. That ramp has been wet since 1974, and there is a green stripe down the middle of it that has its own ecosystem. I want to be fair to the ramp too. I was showing off. Nesbitt. Fergus. Nesbitt, the club captain, a man who says good session, the way other people say, excuse me, had made a joke about the bike shop girl carrying the toys, and Tally had laughed, and I had turned around to say something clever with 4 meters of carbon fiber balanced on my shoulder. My left foot went out from under me. There is a moment in a fall that lasts much longer on the inside than the outside. Mine went like this. The blade, don't drop the blade. The blade costs 400 pounds. Grab something. The rack, grab the rack. I grabbed the rack. The rack was bolted into a wall that has been damp since the Second World War. It moved about 4 inches. 4 inches is nothing. 4 inches is the width of a hand. And up in the dark, on the top shelf, Boat 9 came off its sling. I said the sound was small. It was. Everything after it was very large. Someone got the boat down, 2 men and Tally and Dot with her arms full of somebody's towels, all shouting instructions at each other in the way people do when they're frightened and can't say so. They laid it on the trestles under the strip light, and everybody made a circle round it the way you do around an accident on the road. And I stood outside the circle because there was no room in it, and also because I no longer wanted to exist. I could see the crack from where I was. It ran along one plank on the starboard side, about the length of my forearm, right where the hull curves. It had opened just enough to show pale wood underneath the varnish. That's the thing about wood. When it breaks, it shows you the color it was on the day it was cut. 9 years of dust on the outside, and underneath it was as blonde and new as a fresh matchstick. And the whole time I stood there, I was doing the same calculation over and over. What does a hand-built wooden double skull cost? What does that one cost? What do I have? 1,100 pounds in an account that is supposed to be for a new roof, a van with a temperamental clutch, a shop that belongs to a man in Portugal. Then the circle opened, because she came through it. I hadn't seen her arrive. She'd been in the shed. Obviously, she was always in the shed at that hour, and somebody must have run for her. She was carrying a toolbox, which she set down on the concrete with a care that was somehow worse than if she'd thrown it. Solveig Brandt, up close, was not what she was from the middle of the river. From the river, she was a silhouette and a rumor. Up close, she was a tall woman with a wind-burnt face and deep green eyes and hair gone completely silver, cut short and pushed straight back, except for one piece at the front that would not stay, and which she did not appear to have noticed in 9 years. There was a scar on the inside of her left wrist, thin and white, and when she crouched by the bow, I watched her press her thumb into it once, hard, the way you press a bruise to see if it's still yours. She looked at the crack for about 10 seconds, which is an extremely long time when 40 people are holding their breath. Then she said to nobody, "It's on the seam." Dot said, "Is that bad, love?" And Solveig said, "No." That was it. That was the whole verdict. She stood up, and I finally got my mouth to work. And everything I had rehearsed in the previous 90 seconds came out at once, in the wrong order, at speed. "I'll pay for it. I've got 1,100. I know that's probably not. I can do payments. I run the bike shop on the towpath. I'm good for it. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She looked at me. I have been looked at before. This was different. It was the look of somebody reading a gauge. Not unkind, just accurate and completely without hurry. And it went on for 2 full seconds after I'd stopped talking, which is when I discovered that 2 seconds is the length of an entire personality collapsing. Then she said, "Same time tomorrow," picked up her toolbox and walked back to the shed. Here's what I did with that. Nothing. I did nothing with it because I did not go back. I got changed with my hands shaking. I went home. I opened the shop 2 hours early and rebuilt a headset that did not need rebuilding. And at 11 o'clock, I wrote a message to the club secretary that said I was resigning from the novice squad due to work commitments, which was a lie that everybody involved could see through from space. Then I put my club key in an envelope with the 1,100 pounds in cash, wrote "Towards Boat 9" on the front, and pushed it through the clubhouse door at 9 that night when I knew the building would be empty. The next morning I woke at 5:20 out of habit, lay in the dark and thought, good, done, handled. I have never in my life been more wrong about anything.
If this story stayed with you, Hit subscribe so the next one can find you. Stay close.
Because at 5:40 the following morning, Wednesday, I opened the shop's shutter. The shop is on the towpath, remember? The towpath runs past the Boathouse. There is precisely one route from my flat to my work, and it goes past those green doors. This town has one of everything. And I looked up the path out of pure animal instinct. The boathouse doors were open. The strip light was on inside, and in the doorway, standing with her heels together the way rowers stand without knowing they do it, was Solveig Brandt, in that charcoal coat, holding 2 paper cups. She wasn't looking at the shop. She was looking at the water. I stood behind my own shutter like a burglar in my own building until she went inside. Thursday, same. 5:40, 2 cups, the flat gray light. Friday, same. On Friday, Tally came into the shop at lunchtime, sat on the counter without being invited, ate one of my biscuits and said, "So are you going to explain, or?" "There's nothing to explain. I broke a 9,000-pound boat." 14, said Tally. I put my head on the counter. Also, she gave the envelope back, Tally said with her mouth full. Dot's got it behind the urn. Dot says, and I'm quoting her exactly, "Tell that girl the money is not the point and she knows it." I don't know it. Dot says you do. Tally took another biscuit. Everyone's saying she's waiting for you. She's waiting for the tide, Tally. She rose at that time. She's always rowed at that time. Tally looked at me the way a 19-year-old looks at a 24-year-old who has just said something profoundly stupid, which is a look with no mercy in it whatsoever. "She hasn't taken the single out all week," she said. "She just stands there with 2 coffees till 20 past, then she goes into the shed." The room got very quiet. Or I did. It's honestly hard to tell the difference from the inside. 2, I said. 2, said Tally, and ate the rest of my biscuits. I lasted until Monday. That's 6 days, and I'd like some credit. Because on the Sunday, I actually drove the long way round. Over the bridge, up through the estate, down past the school, to avoid 140 meters of towpath. It added 11 minutes to a journey to buy milk. My clutch is temperamental. I did it anyway. On the Monday, it rained the way it rains here in October, which is not dramatic, just complete. And I stood at my shutter at 5:38 and watched the path, and told myself I was checking the weather. She was there at 5:40 with the coffees, in the rain, with the hood of that coat not up, and something in me, and I want to be honest, it wasn't courage. It was closer to the feeling you get when a phone has been ringing for a very long time. Something in me put on a jacket and walked 140 meters up a wet towpath at 20 to 6 in the morning to tell a woman to stop. She watched me come the whole way. That was the worst part. 20 meters is a very long distance when somebody is watching you walk it and their face does not change at any point. I stopped about 3 feet away, which is the distance you stop at when you have decided in advance not to get closer, and I said the sentence I'd built in my head on the way up. "You have to stop doing this." Solveig Brandt looked at me, rain in her silver hair. That one piece at the front stuck to her forehead. Green eyes, absolutely level. "Doing what?" she said. It wasn't a question. She doesn't really do questions. "Standing there, waiting, with the—" I gestured at the cups, and my keys were in that hand, and the brass bell rang, once, tiny and ridiculous between us. "With the coffees, in front of everyone. People are talking about it." "Yes, so stop." "No," she said, and then she held one of the cups out. I did not take it. I want that noted. I stood there in the rain with my arms crossed like a woman with principles, and I said, "I'm not coming back. I resigned. I'm not a rower. I was never going to be a rower. I did 11 days, and I destroyed the one thing in that building that mattered. So honestly, the kindest thing." "You didn't destroy it," she said. "There's a crack in it the length of my arm." "Yes. That's—" I made a noise. "Do you understand that I'm apologizing? This is what an apology sounds like. It has more words, but that's what it is." "I know what it is." She was still holding the cup out. Her arm did not appear to be getting tired, which I found personally offensive. "It's the wrong one." "The wrong apology?" "The wrong sound," said Solveig Brandt. "You're sorry the boat is cracked. Everyone in that building is sorry the boat is cracked. Nobody in that building has ever asked me why it was up on the rack." The rain got into the back of my collar. Somewhere behind us, a duck did something undignified. "Why was it up on the rack?" I said. And she said, "Take the coffee and I'll tell you." I took the coffee. I'd like to say I took it because I was curious about the boat. I took it because it was warm and because 6 days of driving round an entire housing estate to avoid one building had worn a hole in me. And because when a person stands in the rain holding something out for that long, the polite thing and the necessary thing turn out to be the same thing. I drank some. Then I stopped and looked into the cup and said, "This is wrong." "It's yours," she said, already turning. "No, there's about a liter of milk in this." "Yes," said Solveig Brandt, walking away down the side of the boathouse. "Bakery, 6.20. Every morning for 4 years. Large, too much milk, half a sugar. And you always apologize to Marion for not having the right change." I stood on the towpath in the rain with a coffee in my hand and my mouth open. I said to her back, "That's an alarming amount of information." "You're loud," she said. "Are you coming?" The shed behind the boathouse is not what you would imagine, unless what you imagine is a cathedral built by somebody very tired. It's long and low with a stove at one end and a skylight that somebody has cleaned recently, which in a building like that is basically a religious act. Along the walls, molds, curved and pale, like the ribs of something extinct, a rack of hand planes in ascending order of size, all with their blades wound back. Clamps, cedar dust so fine it hangs in the light from the skylight and comes down onto your shoulders like a very slow snow. And underneath everything, the smell, varnish and cut wood and river, which is the smell I now associate, permanently and inconveniently, with being told the truth. Boat 9 was on the trestles under the good light. In the boathouse, in the dark, on a rack, it had been an object. Down here, it was something else. Long and narrow and honey-colored, with the grain of the planks running in these long, unbroken curves that your eye follows whether you want to or not. And the crack on the starboard side like a line drawn on a photograph. "Cedar over oak frames," she said, hanging up her coat. "2 seats. It's a double. It's a double." She said it the way you say the name of somebody who has died, which is to say normally, with the whole weight of it sitting underneath the word instead of on top. I put my coffee down on the bench, on a bit of newspaper, because even 11 days in a rowing club teaches you that you do not put a cup down on a surface belonging to a person who owns 22 planes. "You said nobody asks why it was on the rack," I said. Solveig Brandt pushed the piece of silver hair off her forehead, which did nothing, and it fell straight back, and she pressed her thumb once into the scar on the inside of her left wrist. "I built it in the year after," she said. "I couldn't row. I couldn't be near anyone who could. So I bought this shed with metal money, and I built a boat. And I built it the way you build something you intend to use. Every fitting is right. The rigging is set for me on stroke side. There's a place under the bow deck where I put my name and the date because I thought there would be a day when that mattered. And then it was finished," she said, "and I had made a double. I didn't understand for a second, and then I did, and it went into me somewhere under the ribs where good sentences go. You built a 2-person boat. Yes, on purpose. I don't build anything by accident, so who was it for?" And Solveig Brandt, silver medalist, most watched woman in Ashfield, 40 words a week, picked up a small brass caliper from the bench and turned it over twice in her fingers and said, "That was the part I hadn't solved." Here's what she told me, standing at the trestles, in the order she told it, which was not the order it happened. That she was good very young, and that being good very young is a way of never learning how to ask for anything because it all gets brought to you. That the wrist went in March, that the surgeon was excellent and the physiotherapist was excellent, and the arm works perfectly for every human activity except the one that involves loading it at full body weight 60 times a minute for 7 minutes. That she came home because home was the only place that didn't want a statement from her. That for 9 years, she had rowed a single scull at 5:40 every morning alone, because a single is the only boat that never asks another person to get up in the dark for you. And that she had put the double on the top rack in the 2nd year, because seeing it every day at eye level had begun to feel like a person standing in her kitchen not saying anything. Wood that's never been wet doesn't know what it's for, she said. It goes brittle. It shrinks in the dry. That's why it broke where it broke. She put 2 fingers on the crack, the way she had in the boathouse. It didn't break because you fell. It broke because nothing had ever asked it to hold. I looked at the pale wood inside the dark wood. You're going to have to say that again slower, I said, because I think it's about me, and I want to be sure before I get upset. And that was the first time I saw the corner of her mouth move. Not a smile, a millimeter, the width of a plane shaving. But I clocked it the way you clock a noise in an engine, and God help me, I spent the next 4 weeks trying to make it happen again. The arrangement was this. She would repair boat 9. She would not take my money, which was already in an envelope behind Dot's tea urn, and which Dot was refusing to give back to either of us on the grounds that it can stay there till one of you talks sense. Instead, I would come to the shed, not to the squad. I'd said no to the squad twice, and she never asked a third time, but to the shed at 5:40, and I would do exactly what I was told with my hands. Why? I said. Genuinely, you can repair this in your sleep. Yes. So why do you need a bike mechanic? She looked at me with that gauge-reading look. Because you're the only person in this town, said Solveig Brandt, who's ever put a hand on that boat. I want to tell you about the mornings, because the mornings are the whole middle of this story, and they went on for 5 weeks. 5:40, the shed, the stove already lit because she got there at 5, and I never once beat her, though I tried twice, and both times she opened the door before I knocked. 2 cups on the bench, hers black, mine an insult to coffee. And then work. Week 1 was preparation, which is a polite word for 200 hours of sanding. She cut the damaged plank back, not the whole plank, just the sick part of it, in a long, shallow diagonal that she marked with the brass caliper and a flat pencil. It's called a scarf, she said. You don't replace the board. You cut the old wood back to something honest and let the new wood take the load along the diagonal. Why diagonal? Because a straight join is a hinge, she said, and a diagonal is a handshake. I have thought about that sentence roughly once a week ever since. I said at the time, do you know you talk like a fortune cookie that lifts weights? And she said, sand it. And I sanded it. Week 2, I sanded through the varnish on a section I was not supposed to touch, about the size of a postcard. I stood there looking at the pale patch, going through the standard stages, which are, nobody saw, everybody saw, I should leave the country. She came over. She looked at it. She said, I'm sorry. No, that's the 5th coat, she said. It was going to come off anyway. You've saved me 40 minutes. She handed me the block back. Do the rest of it the same. I want to be clear about what went through me at that moment because at the time I labeled it relief. It was not relief. Relief doesn't do that. Week 3, she taught me to steam a plank, which involves a wallpaper stripper, a length of drain pipe, and a level of improvisation that I found genuinely moving in a woman with 22 planes. When the new cedar came out of the pipe, it was hot and floppy and smelled like a forest having a bath. And we bent it into the mold together with our hands 9 inches apart on the same piece of wood. And she said, hold. And I held. And she wound a clamp down and my ears went hot for reasons I attributed to the steam. Week 4, she started letting me use the good plane. And week 5, I realized I had stopped counting the weeks as a debt and started counting them as something else, which is when trouble starts in any story. Things I cataloged, because apparently that's a thing I do now, that she stands with her heels together when she's still, always, without knowing it, that she says better instead of well done and instead of no, and that comes in at least 4 distinct flavors which I could identify by the end of week 2 the way farmers know weather, that she presses her thumb into the wrist scar when she's deciding something, and that the deciding takes between 1 and 4 seconds, and that she has never once in front of me decided something and then changed it, that she reads the river out of the skylight before she reads anything else, that the brass caliper lives in the left pocket of that coat, and she takes it out to measure things that do not need measuring when a conversation gets close to her, that the second button of the coat was missing, that she has a way of listening where she stops moving completely. Most people listen while doing something, She stops. It is, and I say this as a woman with a functioning nervous system, an extremely difficult thing to be on the receiving end of at 6 in the morning. Dot Feeney named it in week 3, because of course she did. I'd come up to the clubhouse for hot water, which is the only thing the shed doesn't have, and Dot was doing the urn, and she said without turning round, "You'll want to know she hasn't taken the single out since October." "She's busy. She rode that single the morning of her mother's funeral," said Dot. "She rode it the week the roof came off. She's not busy, love." I looked into my mug. "I broke her boat, Dot." Dot Feeney turned round then and gave me the full 71 years of it. "You broke it open," she said. "There's a difference, and everyone in this club can see it except the 2 of you, which is normal. Now take the big flask. She never drinks enough water. She's like a plant." Tally found out in week 4 and reacted the way you would expect a 19-year-old to react, which is loudly, and then unexpectedly, with tenderness. She came down to the shed on a Saturday to get me for something, and found us both under the hull, on our backs, on a moving blanket, marking the inside of the new plank with a torch between our teeth, arguing about whether a bicycle is more or less honest than a boat. I was saying a bicycle is more honest because it tells you immediately when you've done something stupid. Solveig was saying a boat tells you too, just later, and with more water. We were laughing. I was laughing. She was doing the millimeter. Tally stood in the doorway for about 8 seconds before either of us noticed. "Oh," she said. "Oh, no." "Tally." "No, this is great," she said, backing out. "This is genuinely great. I'm going to go and be normal outside now." By Tuesday, the whole club knew, and by Thursday, the whole town knew, because in Ashfield, the bakery is also the newspaper. Marion asked me, while making the coffee with too much milk, whether it was true that I was helping down the shed, in a voice with about 9 layers in it, and I said yes, and my ears went hot again, and there was no steam involved that time at all. There was one person who didn't find it charming. Fergus Nesbitt caught me on the ramp in the last week of November with a clipboard, because men like Fergus are never anywhere without a clipboard. "Word to the wise," he said. "Committee's talking about the shed." "What about it?" "It's clubland. She's had it on a peppercorn since, well," he did a thing with his shoulders. "There's a feeling we could do more with the space. Storage, gym, maybe. And there's the boat itself. 14 grand of assets sitting on trestles doing nothing for 9 years, and now it's damaged, so it's not an asset. It's hers. Built on club premises," said Fergus Nesbitt, in club time. And then, with a little laugh, "Anyway, good session," and walked off. And I stood there holding a flask of water for a woman who is like a plant, discovering an entirely new emotion. The first week of December, she put me in a boat. Not that boat. An ancient plastic single called the barge that has been used to teach beginners since the 70s and has all the responsiveness of a bathtub with opinions. She walked me down to the raft at 6:10 with the frost still on the boards and said, "Sit, hands on, don't row. I know how to..." "You know how to be 1/8 of a boat," she said. "This is different. Sit." Do you know what nobody tells you about a single skull? It is not a boat. It is a decision you have to keep making. Everything about it wants to tip you into the cleave in December, and the only reason it doesn't is that you are constantly, minutely negotiating with it. And the moment you think about anything else, a woman on the raft, for example, with her heels together, the negotiation collapses. I fell in on day 2. Obviously, I fell in on day 2. The cleave in December is about 4 degrees and tastes like an old penny. I came up making a noise, and she was already crouched at the edge of the raft with her hand out, and I took it, and she pulled me in. One motion, no strain, which was infuriating. And then she took off that charcoal coat and put it round my shoulders, and I stood there dripping and shaking with my teeth, going like a bell. "You let go of the handles," she said. "I noticed." "Never let go of the handles. Solveig, I'm in your coat." She stopped moving. "That thing she does." "Yes," she said. And I said, through my teeth, because I am a coward with a functioning sense of self-preservation, "Second button's missing." She looked at the coat, on me. "I know," she said. By mid-December, the boat was structurally whole. The scarf joint went in on a Tuesday. She let me hold the new cedar in place while she brought the clamps down. And when the glue had gone off and she planed the proud edge back flush, I watched the join disappear under the blade and shavings so fine you could read through them. You could not see where the old wood stopped. You had to know where to look. And even then, in that light, it was just a line in the grain, like all the other lines in the grain. "There," she said. I ran my thumb over it, warm from the plane. "You can't feel it," I said. "You can't feel it now. In 5 years you'll be able to find it in the dark." She started winding the blade back into the plane. "The seam is the strongest part of the board. It's the only part somebody chose." I was still touching it. I remember exactly where my hand was. "Solveig," I said, "what happens when it's finished?" The plane stopped. "Varnish," she said. 6 coats, 10 days if the shed stays warm." "That's not what I asked." And she looked up, and the skylight had that low gray winter light coming through it, and the dust was doing its slow snow between us. And she said, "I know. You've reached the part where wanting turns into something more. If you want the hotter, uncensored GL scenes, they're on my Patreon, GL After Hours. Details in the description." Now, back to Hattie, who was standing in a shed at 6:30 in the morning, discovering that she had run out of jobs to do with her hands. It rained that night. Proper rain. The kind that comes down the valley and sits on the town for a day and a half. And the shed roof over the stove end has a seam of its own that leaks when it rains from the west. I came at 5:40 to find her up a ladder with a tin of roof sealant, which is, and I told her this, an insane thing to be doing in the dark in December. "It's over the varnish bench." "It's over your head, Solveig. Get down. I'll do it. I'm shorter. I fall better." That isn't how ladders work. It's exactly how ladders work. She came down, not because I was right. I want to be accurate. She came down because she was finished. And when she stepped off the last rung, she turned round, and I hadn't moved back far enough. And there we were, about 8 inches apart, with the stove going and the rain doing what rain does on a corrugated roof, which is make a room feel like the inside of a hell breath. Her hand smelled of sealant. There was cedar dust in her silver hair. The piece at the front had fallen forward again. I reached up and put it back. I don't know why I did it. That is a lie, actually. I know exactly why I did it. I'd been wanting to do it since the 2nd week of November, and after 5 weeks of not touching a woman I saw every single morning, I had approximately the impulse control of the barge. She went absolutely still. "Hattie," she said. It was the first time she'd used my name. 5 weeks. I'd started to think she didn't know it, that I was some category to her, the girl who broke the boat, and instead she'd been holding it in reserve like the last dry match. "Yes," I said. My hand was still up. I hadn't taken it back. "I'm 37, she said. "I've lived in one town for 9 years, and I speak to almost nobody. I'm not—" And I watched her thumb go to the scar on her wrist and press. Once, hard. 1 second, 2. "You're not what?" I said. "I'm not going to be a thing that happens to you," said Solveig Brandt, "because you were in the shed." And I said, "And I've never been more grateful for the 24 years of being a person who says things out loud before checking." I said, "I drove round an entire housing estate to avoid this building. 11 minutes. My clutch is temperamental. I did it 4 times. 2 seconds. Then her hand came up and her palm went along my jaw, and her thumb moved once across my cheekbone, and she kissed me in a shed full of cedar dust with the rain going on the roof. I dropped my keys. The bell rang when they hit the floor. Neither of us picked them up for quite a long time. The varnish took 10 days, and they were the 10 best days I'd had in about 4 years. Varnishing is a stupid job. You do a coat, you wait, you sand it back to almost nothing, you do another, 6 times. The whole point is that 5 of the 6 coats disappear. She wouldn't let me near the last 2. You sand like a woman with somewhere to be, which is the closest that woman ever came to an insult. So I sat on the bench with my hands round a cup and watched her work, and we talked about absolutely nothing for hours at a time. I learned that she can't cook and doesn't care, that she reads 2 books at once, one at each end of the shed, that she has a sister in Tromsø she calls on Sundays, and a mother buried in the churchyard by the bridge, and a father nobody mentions ever, including her. She learned that I talk in my sleep, which she discovered on the fourth night, and which she reported to me in the morning in the flat, measuring voice. You said that's not the right spanner, twice. With feeling. I sewed the second button onto her coat on the seventh night. I did it badly, and I did it in dark red thread, because the only reel in my flat was dark red. And when she came out of the shed and put the coat on and looked down at the one button that didn't match, she stood there for a long time in the cold with her hand flat on it. You could take it off, I said. I could get black. No, said Solveig Brandt. The trouble arrived on the 6th of January in an envelope with a Norwegian stamp. And I know the date because it was the first morning she didn't have the coffees ready. She was at the bench with the letter open, and the caliper was in her hand, and she was measuring the edge of a piece of scrap that did not need measuring. Tromsø, her sister's part of the world. A national program wanted a boat building and rigging post, full-time, 5 years, their own workshop, a title with the word master in it, and a start date in the middle of February. They asked me in 2021, she said, and in 2023. And you said no. I didn't answer. I looked at the letter. I looked at the boat, which was finished and gleaming and standing on the trestles like something waiting to be told. Solveig! This is... And I want you to know that every single cell in my body was saying, say it's nothing, say the shed is better, say Ashfield is better, and I did not say those things. Because Dot Feeney had told me in November that this woman had rode a single skull alone on the morning of her mother's funeral. And I had been thinking about that ever since. This is enormous. Yes. Are you going to answer it this time? And she pressed her thumb into the scar on her wrist. And I watched the seconds go. 1, 2, 3, 4. That was the longest one I ever saw. It scared me more than the letter did. The committee met on the 9th. I wasn't a member. I'd resigned, remember, by text message in October, like a coward. But the meeting was in the clubhouse. And the clubhouse is a room with 40 chairs and a whiteboard and a photograph of 8 men who all appear to be the same man. And Dot Feeney told me what time it started, while looking directly into my eyes. Item 4 on the agenda was the shed. Fergus Nesbitt did it properly. He had a printed page. He talked about square meterage and insurance and a strategic vision. And he said the phrase sweat equity without any visible pain. And he proposed that the club serve notice on the workshop tenancy at the end of the season and repurpose the building for storage and gym equipment. And he added, at the end, with a little laugh, and obviously there's the question of the double, which has been taking up rack space for 9 years and is, on any sensible view, a club asset. Solveig was standing at the back by the door. She had not sat down. She did not say one word. And I watched her not say it. And I understood, the way you sometimes understand a whole person in 1 second, that she was never going to. Not because she couldn't. Because in 9 years in that town, she had never once asked anybody in that room for anything. And she wasn't going to start in front of them. So I stood up. 40 people turned around. Same room. Same 40. The last time they'd all turned around at once, I'd been standing under a rack with my hand on a wall and a piece of cedar coming down. Sorry, I said. Hi, Hattie, I fix bicycles. Somebody laughed, not unkindly. I've got a question, and it's for Dot. Actually, not for Fergus. I turned round. Dot, who pays the insurance on the launch? Dot Feeney folded her arms and smiled at the ceiling like a woman who had been waiting 11 weeks for the right question. Club account, said Fergus. Dot? Anonymous standing order, said Dot Feeney. Every January, 9 years. The room went very still. And the mooring fees on the pontoon, I said. And the new bow ball rule that meant every boat in that building needed refitting in 2019. Who did those, Dot? Who did all 41 of them for nothing? In a shed with a leaking roof at 5 in the morning before anybody else in this town was awake? Nobody said anything. Nesbitt looked at his printed page as if it had changed language. I'm not a member, I said. I did 11 days and I dropped 14,000 pounds off a rack. So I'm nobody, and I know that. But you can't serve notice on someone who's been quietly paying for the room you're standing in. That's not a strategic vision. That's rude, Fergus. Honestly, it's rude. And from the back of the room, into the silence, in that flat, unhurried measuring voice, Solveig Brandt said, Hattie, just my name, nothing else. And I sat down like a folding chair. They voted to withdraw the item, 11-2. Fergus voted with the majority, because men like Fergus always do, once the majority exists. Afterwards, in the car park, in the dark, she stood in front of me with her hands in the pockets of that coat and the one dark red button, and said nothing for a while. I know, I said. I know. You didn't want anyone to. You told 40 people something I've never told my sister. She said. Yes. Flavor 3. The one that means I am going to be annoyed about this later and grateful about it forever. I'd got very good at those. And then I ruined it. Not immediately. It took me 8 more days, and I did it slowly and carefully with the best intentions, which is the only way anybody ever really ruins anything. Here's the shape of it. Every morning that January, I woke up at 5:20 in the dark and thought about Tromsø, about a workshop with proper light and heat and a title with the word master in it, and a country where her sister was, and a national squad who would say her name properly instead of the way this town says it. And every morning I thought, she isn't answering that letter because of me. I could feel it happening. She'd started making plans out loud with an odd flatness. In March, we'll do the junior boats. In April, the roof. The way you'd read a list you'd already decided not to buy. So on the 17th of January, in the shed, with the finished boat on the trestles between us and the stove going, I said the sentence I'd been building for 8 days. You have to go to Norway. She stopped moving. That thing. No, she said. Solveig? I said no. You've been offered it 3 times. 3. And the only difference between this time and the other 2 is that I'm standing in your shed drinking your coffee wrong, and I am not. And my voice did something I hated. I am not going to be the reason you stay in a shed. And Solveig Brandt put down the caliper and said, very evenly, then you don't understand what the shed is. I understand you built a 2-seat boat and put it on a rack for 9 years because you couldn't ask anybody to get in it. I have never regretted a true sentence faster. She didn't shout. She has never once raised her voice at me, before or since, which I have come to understand is not calm. It's control. And control costs something every time you spend it. She said, go home, Hattie. And I went. It was 9 days. The shop was fine. The shop was so fine. I have never in my life produced so much competent bicycle maintenance. I rebuilt a wheel that didn't need rebuilding. I reorganized the entire spares drawer by thread pitch. I answered a postcard from Portugal with 3 sides of paper about drivetrain wear, and my uncle rang me from a beach to ask if I was quite all right. Every morning at 5:40, I stood behind the shutter, out of habit, like a woman with a phantom limb. And the doorway was empty. That was the thing I hadn't understood in October, when I was standing behind that same shutter being irritated about a woman with 2 coffees. I'd thought the waiting was pressure. It wasn't. It was the only sentence she had. On the 4th day, Tally came in and didn't eat any biscuits, which is how I knew it was serious. She's rowing again, she said. The single, every morning, out at 5:40, back at 6:30. Good, I said. That's good. It's not good, Hattie. She looks like a woman doing lengths of a swimming pool in a building that's on fire. On the 7th day, Dot Feeney came down the towpath in the rain and stood in my shop and put a flask on my counter. The big one, the club one, the one I used to fill for a woman who was like a plant, and said one sentence. She's had that letter on the bench for 3 weeks, love, and she still hasn't answered it, and you're not the reason. You're just the first person who ever made it a real question. Then she took the flask back and left, because Dot Feeney has never once in her life waited for a reply. The head of the cleave is on the first Saturday in February. It's not a proper regatta. It's a 5-kilometer processional race down the river. Everything entered in categories, crews going off at 10-second intervals, and half the town on the bridge with flasks and the other half pretending they've got errands on the towpath. It is the single biggest thing that happens in Ashfield between Christmas and the spring. Entries close at midnight on the Wednesday. At 11:40 on the Wednesday night, I sat at the counter in the shop with a laptop and the club's entry form open, and I typed in a crew of 2. Category: mixed, no. Women's double, novice and above. Boat name: 9. Seat 1, S. Brandt. Seat 2, H. Brannigan. And I paid the £18 entry fee with a card. And I sat there for about a minute with my finger over the button, and then I pressed it. Because that is who I am. And because I had finally understood what she'd been trying to tell me since October. You can apologize to a person forever. You can pay them £1,100 in an envelope. But if what you broke was a thing that had never been used, the only apology that means anything is to use it. Then I closed the laptop and had what I would describe as a moderate crisis until approximately 4:30 in the morning. At 5:40 on the Thursday, in the dark, I went down to the Boathouse and let myself in with the key Dot had never once let me return. Boat 9 came off the trestles at about the weight I remembered. I got it onto my shoulder wrong twice and right the third time, and I walked it out through the green doors and down the ramp. The wet ramp, the same ramp, the green stripe, my whole entire life on that ramp, one step at a time in the frost, alone. I put it in the water, 9 years, and it went in like nothing. That's the part I wasn't ready for. There was no ceremony to it at all. Wood touched water and the water simply took it, the way water does, without asking a single question about where it had been. I got the blades in the gates. I got one foot in the boat, which is the point at which single-handed launching of a double scull becomes a comedy, and I sat down in the stern seat and I pushed off. I would like to report that I rode it beautifully. I got about 40 meters. I hit the pontoon of the sailing club on the way past, gently, and I nearly went in twice. And the boat was set up for a woman 4 inches taller than me on stroke side, so everything felt like driving a van with the seat in the wrong place. And the sun wasn't up, and the mist was doing that breathing thing on the cleave. And I sat in a 14,000-pound boat in the dark, holding on to the handles, never let go of the handles, and shaking and laughing and completely unable to turn around. That's how she found me. She came down the bank at a walk, not a run. Silver hair, charcoal coat, one dark red button. She stood on the end of the pontoon with her heels together and looked at the boat in the water for a long time. And I looked back at her, and neither of us said anything. And the mist went on breathing. Then she said, "You're on stroke side." "Yes, that's my side." "I know," I said. "You'll have to come and take it off me." She got in. That's the whole ending, really. Everything after it is detail. She walked round to the raft and I brought the boat in with about the elegance of a shopping trolley, and she held the gunwale with one hand and stepped in the way people do when they have done a thing 10,000 times, and the boat went down 2 inches and steadied, and she sat in front of me with her back close enough that I could have counted the cedar dust on her collar. She said, "Hands." I said, "Hands." We rode to the bridge and back, and it was objectively terrible. I caught a crab at the second bend. She said, "Flavor too." My timing was a disgrace, and my blade work would have made a coach cry, and about halfway back the light came up over the mill and turned the whole river the color of weak tea. And I stopped thinking entirely, and for maybe 6 strokes, 6 more than 4, I counted, the boat went quiet under us and just ran. When we got back to the raft, she sat with her hands on the handles for a moment and didn't get out. "I entered us," I said, to the back of her head, because it's easier to confess to the back of a head. In the head, Saturday, it's £18 and it's non-refundable. And if you say no, I'll withdraw it, and I'm sorry, and also I'm not. Solveig Brandt turned round in her seat, which is a thing you absolutely should not do in a racing double, and looked at me. "I answered the letter on Monday," she said. Everything in me went cold and then hot. "Okay," I said. I said no. "Solveig, listen." And she put her hand on my wrist. Not the coat, not my jaw, just my wrist, the way you'd hold a rope. "I'm not staying because of you. If I stay because of you, then in 4 years, I'll be a woman who gave something up. and you'll be the person I gave it up for. And I've seen that marriage, and I won't do it to either of us." "Then why?" "Because I've spent 9 years in a shed making boats for other people to put in the water," she said, "and I want to be in this one. That's all. That's the entire reason." She pressed her thumb into the scar. "1 second. You're not why I'm staying. You're how I found out there was a difference." The mist, the mill, the whole ridiculous town waking up around us. "Right," I said thickly. "Well, you can't say things like that to a woman who's already going to lose a race on Saturday." And there it was. Not the millimeter this time. The actual thing, the whole smile, 37 years old, and about as often used as that boat had been, and I would have dropped an entire rack of them for it. We came 11th, out of 14 in the women's double category, at the head of the cleave, in front of about 400 people on a bridge, in a 9-year-old hand-built cedar double with a scarf joint you couldn't see unless you knew where to look. 11th. I want to be honest about that, because everybody in this town who tells the story now tells it as though we won something, and we did not. We were beaten by 2 university crews, a pair of sisters from downriver who row like one organism, and a woman in her 50s who I'm fairly sure is a witch. But here's what happened at the finish. They read the crew names out over the loudspeaker as each boat came through. That's the whole ceremony of it, a man with a microphone and a list. And when we came past the post, the man said, "Number 31, Cleve Rowing Club, 9, Brandt and Brannigan." And 400 people on that bridge made a noise you could feel in the water. Not for me. Obviously not for me. For her, in a boat, going past that town at speed for the first time in 9 years. Dot Feeney cried into the tea urn. Tally screamed loud enough to be audible from the water at 400 meters. Fergus Nesbitt shook my hand afterwards and said, "Good session." And I have decided to let him have that. And Solveig sat in the bow with her head down and her hands still on the handles for a long moment after we stopped breathing. And then she said, without turning round, "Better. It's June now. The shed roof is fixed properly by a roofer because I put my foot down. There's a junior squad on Tuesdays and Thursdays that she coaches badly and adores. 11 children who are not remotely afraid of her, which is the funniest thing that has ever happened in this town. There's an apprentice coming in September, a girl from up the valley who wrote to her on paper. Boat 9 lives on the bottom rack now at eye level, where you have to walk round it. The letter from Tromsø is pinned above the bench, answered, which she says is the point. Her sister came at Easter and hugged me at the station before she hugged Solveig, and Solveig looked at the sky. My uncle's brass bell is screwed to the frame above the shed door, so it rings when anyone comes in. She pretends this annoys her. She has never once taken it down. And every morning at 5:40, the two of us go down that wet ramp, the same ramp, the green stripe, the whole ecosystem, and put a boat in the water, and some mornings it runs, and most mornings it doesn't. And I still catch a crab about once a week. And she still says, in 4 flavors, and there is still a coffee waiting on the bench with far too much milk in it. Last week she was carrying the blades up, and I was standing in the doorway of that boathouse with 2 cups in my hands, and I saw her clock it. Me, the doorway, the 2 coffees, the whole shape of it. And she stopped dead on the ramp and looked at me with those green eyes for about 2 seconds. I said, "What?" She said, "Nothing." And then, "Same time tomorrow?" That was the first time she'd ever put a question mark on the end of it. 9 years of standing in doorways, 5 weeks of waiting in the rain, and she'd finally worked out that it was a thing you could ask. So I said the only thing there was to say, which is what I say now, every night, in a flat above a bicycle shop, with a woman whose coat has 1 dark red button. "Same time tomorrow."